All right, welcome back to a continuation of our conversation with Chuck. How are you, sir?
I'm doing well this morning.
You're doing well this morning in your Good Vibes Only cafe, which we like to see
Yeah,
behind you. It's all good.
it's
I
it's
like that
uh
backdrop.
it's actually Red Horn Brewery, and they are predominantly a brewery that also has a whole lot of coffee, and they do a bunch of tacos as well.
Oh
So
well,
it's a pretty nifty setup. But mostly the thing that I end up indulging in is the bottomless drip coffee, which is like the blessing and the curse.
yeah,
Later in the
that
day,
sounds like.
they will make me my own pots of decaf, and so that's
Oh,
cool.
nice. It's sounds like it's a perfect place. Brewery, coffee shop, and tacos. Like, what else
All
could you want in life? Just move
all in
in.
one, right?
Just move in. So. Well, it's probably one of the better coffee backdrops I've enjoyed seeing you from our
Yeah, it's
variety of
cool.
chats.
The internet's way more stable than Starbucks,
Yeah,
so maybe this
coffee
is
would
a
be better.
relevant piece because it was. I don't know. It's all relevant. So Tony and I were talking about consistency relative to customer experience because it intersects a lot of like client things in crypto. I know that this is like straight tangent from getting into part two where we had left off in part one of kind of the story up to this point, but made me think of it with coffee shops and relationships need consistency to
Hmm.
thrive. They can maintain whatever the status quo is, like inconsistency, but they do need
Yeah.
consistency to grow and thrive. And it's cool to be able to recognize, or at least when I go to businesses, regardless of what they are, like I'm an I'm a curious human, and I try to notice things.
Hmm.
And so what I noticed at Starbucks, and then ended up talking about with Tony, and this is like the tie into consistency and then like quantifying it, but they've got really stable tables.
Yep.
The coffee sucks. The
Yep.
Wi-Fi is generally not super stable, but like the table is going to sit still so you can type and have your coffee.
Hmm.
Because I think most of us like we're used to dealing with internet choppiness. We're all
Yep.
okay with like mediocre coffee, but I've got coffee, and that's good enough for being an adult. But like when something is crazy
Oh.
inconvenient, that's a deal breaker.
Yep.
And so consistently having just the ability to create a good workspace,
Yep.
like that does a lot when you travel. And so like what does that play into the lifetime value of a customer based on the consistency of the experience? Like humans are totally down to kick it with super shitty situations as long
Yep.
as they know what the expectation is.
Yeah. We
And
we will
that's just
do whatever. Yeah.
yeah, it was just an interesting thing to reflect on. And then like, well, we were recording that other podcast with Pat Barber yesterday, and he had
Mm.
mentioned that consistency was a big piece of his own coaching development, and like being able to deliver the same seminar over and over and over
Hmm.
again. You have less variables to work on mastering just the craft side of it, and
Yep.
then also through what they provide in Adam with really deliberately structured lesson plans that have coaches' notes that tie into culture and community and kind of the bigger picture stuff. Man,
Mm.
that's the stable table of Starbucks. If
Yeah.
you could get everybody in a gym to operate that way, but if the inconsistency of the client experiences that go into like three different classes in a given day would be three
Mm.
very different experiences. Not to say that coaches don't need their own personalities, but like there needs to be some amount of standardization and structure of the experience. And so for
For,
Starbucks, the experience is your workspace.
yep. And it is that that solid foundation. You know what you're going to expect. So when you go in, you don't like. I know with my coaches, I was always like, you don't need to be a clone of me. What I need you to do is just follow this process so that when members come in, they know that this is the order of events for the day, that it doesn't matter who's doing what, that they know that they're going to warm up, then they're going to go and grab their stuff, and then we're going to do it piece by piece. And then the flow's the same. And then they're like, okay, I know how this works. And then,
Yeah, and then all you have to concentrate on is like curating the experience,
yeah,
which
that's
is
right.
like
And
that is the craft.
yeah, it's once you get out of herding cats mode and traffic control, you can provide a much better experience rather than uh, you know, looking like a duck on a pond that has no idea where it's going and spinning in circles. It's like, I'll get this. No, 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 get this. And suddenly you're about to start the workout 3, 2, 1, and someone's like, I don't have a skipping rope. It's like, dude, like it's, or, I got to pee because we didn't ask that question on that day. It's all those little things that, you know, it's interesting. A lot of my tribe, since I've transitioned out of the affiliate, are trying other affiliates, and they're like, well, it's not as structured as we're used to. Um,
Man, is that not one of the weirdest pieces of the affiliate owner experience? That would be a good one for us to record on the affiliate podcast. Is all of the good things you hear after the fact.
oh, I know.
Not just in selling a gym or shutting a gym
Yeah,
down, but just the amazing things you hear from clients weeks,
yeah,
months, years down the road that you're like,
yeah,
oh, I mean, I knew I was objectively doing my job. I knew that
mm,
I was objectively doing a good job of providing the service that we were like engaging in, but like
yeah.
I didn't know that it meant as much to you as it did. That would have been cool
Or that
just
you'd
for me
paid
to know at the time.
Yeah, or that you'd paid so much attention at the time. And, even yesterday, someone said, well, I don't know who cleans their floors, but they're not quite as clean as ours. And I'm like, well, I think they've got a fancy scrubbing machine. And they're like, well, it's not doing as good of a job as we were. And just little things, not as much demonstration and teaching as we had, but luckily we've been taught, so it'll be okay. And it was just
Yeah.
really interesting. My guys are used to a very structured approach, and now they're in these gyms where it's like, all right, guys, just get all your stuff out for the workout. And they're like, what do I do next? So yeah, it's
But what about the curating? What about like the
yeah,
people like us do things like this? Aren't we all going to do things together? Isn't that part of
yeah.
it?
Like, aren't you gonna help me set that up or tell me what I, recommend what I should do? Yeah. So it's quite interesting watching their little experiences as they go out and, into the big wide world, I guess. And someone said to me, said, well, you've taught us well and you've prepared us well, so we can do this. And,
Yeah, they get to
we
take like ownership. They must become the heroes in their
mm,
own journeys, and like it's
and
gonna be okay.
we know how to move now, so we'll just doesn't matter what someone else tells us. We know the right thing, so we'll just do that, and you'll be okay. It's gonna be okay.
Yeah, and like that's a powerful milestone moment that a lot of people don't get until they're on the other side of it. That like, oh, the mission was complete, the job was
Mm,
done. Maybe I didn't reach all of my fitness goals, but maybe that's not what it was about. Maybe like
mm,
this guide at this point in my story was they were there to
mm.
make me fall in love with like what I could do in
Yeah.
capacity and understand like how to vet what is worthwhile and not worthwhile exercise and build a better relationship with food and like
Mm.
cool the idea of being
Now's the
able to
next step.
think of like yeah like permanent impermanence that like
Mm.
nothing is permanent on a long enough timeline
No.
like the sun collapses into itself and like we get swallowed up by a black hole like everything is fucking vaporized forever and we don't really even know where it goes so
Yeah.
like I don't know everything has to end. That's part of it.
Yeah.
And like endings
That's
are necessary for beginnings and fuck is that a thing that I wish I would have realized earlier in the journey. And so like maybe that gets us kind of back on track. So Lisa
yeah.
had wanted to pick up in part two where we had began the story of kind of like, all right, and this was where I really got into CrossFit, kind of how and why I got into CrossFit. And then some of the skills acquired since and some awareness. Since really I've hashed through a lot of that CrossFit story and journey in a lot of different podcasts,
Mm.
um, but maybe not in the same context. So I'll probably like go
Yep.
through an abbreviated version of like the biography or resume version of it, and just like cool seasons and lessons learned.
Yeah, yeah,
Uh,
that's cool. I mean, and it is a good segue into, talking about that CrossFit journey, but also then, how those skills helped you, you know, become, who you are today as well, and some of those
smoke and mirrors,
adventures along
smoke
the
and
way.
mirrors.
Yeah.
And that's like a big life lesson is that like everybody still feels like that to some degree at every point in the entire journey. But
Yeah.
so not sure exactly the specific moment where we had left off. Besides, was living in Florida with a handful of roommates that were not the healthiest, and kind of reset me back into a lot of bad behaviors, environments, and situations. And ended up seeking CrossFit to have a tribe to be a part of. Didn't know it at the time, as I think many of us don't.
Mm.
You're called to it even if you don't know why, because the call to belong, the call to be a part of both a cause but also a tribe. Like those are two very innate pieces of being a human. And that's a lot of, at least this juncture in my life, like in the context of the podcast, context, thinking about like philosophies, like I think a lot of people end up as really broken versions of themselves because they don't have a cause or a purpose to be aligned with, and they're not a part
Mhm.
of the tribe.
Mm.
I'm exploring like my own thinking on it. Is like, are those two necessary conditions for like a
Mm.
human to thrive? And at least at this point, I do say yes. You know,
Yep.
at this moment, like July 21st, 2022, what I've learned from like that juncture in my life until now, I would say yes. Um, I had a bit of that when I was in the military because it's very purpose driven, and you do have like a band of brothers, and there is a lot of shared suffering creates bonding.
Mhm.
But I still often felt like I was on the outside looking in, like I didn't quite belong. But
Mhm.
CrossFit created an interesting like paradox of identity because on like one side it's it very much so like people like us do things like this, and you're like,
Yep.
at what point do I get to be a part of the cool kid club? But
Yep.
like simultaneously it exists on the other side. It's like, well, do you like the cause? Do you want to be here to kick it? And like, as long as you say yes to both of those things, you're gonna have a great time. Which is
Yep.
a lot of where my own beliefs are like that. A lot of the affiliate community is kind of off track right now because people have lost sight of being attached to a bigger, larger purpose and vision.
Mm.
Even the gyms that are successful in basic financial metrics and like they're healthy gyms, a lot of like frustrated, burned out owners because they're not thinking about it in the context of like really being at war with a
Mm.
lot of the powers that be to change the course of human evolution through solving the world's most vexing problems. So
Yeah. They're
that's
more
cool.
they're more tied up in the day-to-day minutia rather than the big, why am I doing this, you know?
Yeah, that like big pesky why that
Yeah.
helped reframe things. And so like, maybe that was maybe some of it as the former fat kid non-athlete, being able to have a chance to resolve both of those things in a way that made sense. Because it wasn't like I hadn't tried. Like I think most people try
Mm.
diet and exercise
Yeah.
for a long time. Most people are still trying to figure out their own balance of like diet and exercise. So
Mm.
I tried a bunch of shit, but CrossFit was it was just this great opportunity to see through the bullshit. And then when you do have kind of like that fog of war blow past you, you're like, holy shit, I really do want to share this with people. Like this really it works, it makes sense,
Mm.
it's defensible, it's logical, it's rational. There's no like snake oil salesmanship
No.
here. And so maybe like that's where some of it was. We mentioned earlier, like being okay with thinking about the idea of tough conversations or hard conversations. I think that was probably a big draw of CrossFit is it was brutally honest.
Mm.
Especially like back in those days when like everybody on the main site was doing the pain storms, like on like I mean that's where the long Saturday training day at the gym
Mhm.
came from. Like it was
Yep.
it was uh it was an honest conversation that like we have objectively the solution
Mm.
to your problem, so long as like being more fit would help solve some part of your problem. And it's like pretty easy to align that with like literally anything. There's like, but here's the thing, you're gonna have to do all the work. It's gonna be hard, it's gonna be frustrating. It's like, and there's a lot of like honesty that got brought up a lot more often, I think, earlier through the nature of like what the tribe, the community was in those difficult conversations.
Mm.
I don't know that a whole lot of people felt entitled to much fitness, where, maybe that's just my perception. Like at this point in the community, it's like a lot of people are like, I've been doing CrossFit for 3 years, I should have a muscle up. And you're like,
Yep.
what fucking
Well,
planet are you on? Like,
I remember like yesterday's call with Pat is where he said, back when it started, if you got your first muscle up, your photo would go on the main site, with the
yeah.
workout of the day. And that was like, so people were like fighting to earn that spot, not like, well, I've been here 3 years. I should have that now. Like, that's tick the
Well,
boxes.
right. And also to think that like the the laws of large numbers still propagate in the same ways, especially because CrossFit attracted a ton of people like me, a ton of people like you that are like, I've
Mm,
hated the fitness industry forever. I've hated like the
mm.
exercise world forever because it's bro jock douche shithead assholes and everybody is a snake oil salesman and everybody's got
Yep.
some secret fucking formula and it like creates all these feelings of shame and guilt when like it doesn't work out, but it's not designed to work out in the first place. Bullshit, bullshit, bullshit. So anyway, now I'm just ranting.
No.
Um, but to think that, yeah, like, so with laws of large numbers, because like math just does math shit, like the muscle up is still special enough that
Mm,
like back when they had the bandwidth and back when the community was in control of the size, like that was a reward metric in there. It's
mm.
not like that many more people proportionally in the community are doing muscle ups. It's just that the community is enormous. I mean, it's
Yep.
still very much so like probably a 1 in 10,000, somewhere around there.
Mm,
That would just be my like random ass guess. And it is a super random ass guess, but like it is few and far between. Anyway,
mm.
so the tough conversations of like knowing that these things are earned, not given, that this will take hard work, that a lot of the old stuff of like check your ego at the door and like
Mm,
finding good lessons in humility and finding just a better relationship and understanding of maybe some of those like tough conversations that were managing just a lot of like childhood shit earlier on,
yep.
having some of the idea of like tough conversations contextualized into like an experience. And I think that like
Mm,
the tough conversations that I really had in that point in CrossFit were a big piece of my own growth because they're tough conversations with yourself.
yep.
Because
I mean, it's
when you're like in the round of 15s and Fran, like you're sure shit
yeah,
not talking to anybody else, but like man, you've got every voice inside your head.
in your head, and it's being okay with failing as well. Like how much I will always tell classes I coach the overhead squat is unparalleled for showing up any weakness you have in any particular part of your movement, whether it be
Yeah,
stability, strength, mobility. It's and being okay with, wow, this is something I really suck at, and not every part of every workout is in your wheelhouse. There's a little something something for everybody, but it's okay to be bad at something, but then you have to look yourself in the eye and go, am I willing to do the work and get better? So that's one of those internal tough conversations you have with yourself is like, how does that reflect in my real life as well? Like, what am I prepared to do to get better at things
yeah,
that are uncomfortable?
and I think like that's a perfect actual example of one of those tough conversations that can exist externally and internally, right? Like in the coaching context, hey,
Mm,
and I know that like you're not making progress. Like
mm,
we have to bring that to the front.
mm,
But you also, if you do care about how you move through the journey in fitness and what metrics are important to you, like at some point you have to contend with that conversation with yourself on your own. And the answer always only ends up inevitably being like, well, it looks like I'm the constant in all of my problems.
yeah.
Ergo, like I am the problem, so I am the solution. And not that I hadn't had some grasp and awareness of maybe a growth mindset. Maybe it wasn't termed as such like earlier in my life, but just knowing
Mm,
that like, most things are learnable, figure outable skills and you can work through
yeah.
them. CrossFit specifically, not just working out or not just fitness, but CrossFit specifically crystallized that in a very different way for me. And so that is
Mm,
like a lesson from this entire season of my life that started back in 2007, 2008, like, oh, the overhead squat. Man, I remember my
mm.
first overhead squat. Um,
It
it's easy
crushes
to
your
kind of like,
soul.
well, right, like it's easy to like pretend you kind of know what's going on when you've just got the PVC, just like a journal article, and you're like, I think I got it figured out. Then the first time you grab load, you're like, what the fuck is happening to my back? Something is wrong right now. My
Yeah.
entire body is failing me. Um, but then seeing the ability to like create progress there and like being able to get a muscle was a huge deal for me. As
Mm,
the former fat kid that at one point couldn't do a pull
mhm.
up to get a muscle up, like that was
Yep.
a massive piece in changing my identity and my view and belief in myself, and that was really like born from tough conversations that had a
Mm,
chance to be like expressed as probably the most accessible ways to really prove to yourself that like humans are growth capable creatures.
Mm.
A lot of the stories and the beliefs and the bullshit, the baggage that we deal with, it's really interesting because theoretically, like we could have like an immediate adaptation, right? Like we could just like
Mm.
change our mind about it, and it would be
Yep.
done if there wasn't so much like trauma and bullshit wrapped up in it. But in physical adaptation training, you're like, cool, 1 kilo heavier, cool, two
Yep.
kilos heavier, cool, 3 kilos
Yeah.
heavier. Like I'm making forward progress. But your relationship with money or like self-worth or
Yeah.
confidence or like how you communicate with your parents, like it just
Mm.
always feels like shitty, I guess, at least to me.
Yeah.
Like
I guess
not
you don't even have some way to measure that necessarily, though. That's the
right.
beauty of the fitness is like you've got a tangible number. I can see something. Whereas, my relationship with my other half or whatever, or your parents, are like that just always feels hard. It never feels like it
Right.
gets easier.
And it does, and that like you have better conversations, and like your beliefs and your behaviors and your stories are better, and
Mm.
your life objectively moves forward. But because it exists so much in the subjective, even if there
Yeah.
are quantifiable metrics, so like money stories, like that's a
Yeah.
really easy one because at least money is a universal quantifier of value,
Mm.
like because different people can do different things with it, right? So
Yep.
you've recently transacted like multiple 4-figure sales
Hmm.
in a business outside of the gym. So like
Mm.
transacting for $5,000, $3,000, like in that
Mm.
range, just to give context to people.
Mm.
Does it still feel predominantly like just as weird and just as scary as like asking for like $100 or
Yeah.
$200?
For sure, it's a much better feeling at the other end, but it's still that initial, like that initial pucker moment where you're like, oh, someone's gonna give me money to do something for them.
Yeah,
Like,
and I
okay,
think like fitness was a big piece of helping me also build a better understanding of that, right? Like that idea of,
mm,
the iron never lies. 200 pounds is always 200 pounds. And you have this perception when you are weaker and not yet stronger that you're like, oh, when I get stronger, it's going to be so easy. And
yep,
then you're like,
mm,
oh, it's not that it's easy. It's just that like I have the capacity, but it still feels
yep,
predominantly the same. And so fitness and having like so many quantifiable, very objective metrics, like that was an external lesson and that let
mm,
me internalize a piece of growth of like, oh, you can be getting better and have it not actually feel like you're getting better
mm.
at all.
I remember so many conversations with people when they first start CrossFit going, I thought it would be getting easier by now. I went, well, you're just getting better and pushing harder, so it's always going to suck. But if we went back and did your first workout you ever did again, you'd be like, did we even do anything? I said, and
Right.
that's why we retest and track. But people are like, I thought it would be getting easier by now. It's like, that's not how this works. You start adding
No.
more load or moving faster or moving better. Suddenly you have more capacity. So Fran is still going to suck whether you're on day one or day 1 million. It's still going to bite hard. You know.
Yeah, that was always one of my actual favorite consistent conversations to have with clients in the gym.
Mm.
Like, when does it get easier? It's like, well, here's the thing. You're going to do harder, more complicated, heavier stuff faster and longer.
Mm.
But you'll look better naked and you'll feel better about it. So
Yeah,
that's the best I can give you.
that's your
But,
payoff.
but yeah, so like being able to understand that, like that was something that CrossFit really helped me like come to build a better relationship and understanding with. And so those are just kind of like more nature of CrossFit things. And had done
Mm.
CrossFit Garage Gym for a while and was talking with Vanessa on the main site message boards. We both had workout logs on there, and then met Jeff Tucker, who's the former SME for CrossFit Gymnastics and kind of
Mhm.
its origin story, and was affiliate 500 and something at GSX CrossFit in Fort Worth, Texas. And so built like kind of a two-part relationship talking to the two of them. And this was now 2009. I went out there in January. So it was like, that was actually Vanessa and I. So we had started really building like a more intimate relationship as a remote distance or a remote long distance relationship back in
Mhm.
2008. She had sent me a message on August 8th, 2008. So like 888.
You,
It was my old Mister and I sharing a carrot was a picture that I had posted in a 30-day no sugar challenge in the nutrition section of the
Yeah.
forum. And she had reached out to me with a private message, and we continued from there. And then January 1st, so like New Year's, like new year, new you, new life, new all the things, went out to Fort Worth to do my L1 because at that point, 2008, like you couldn't just drive, 4-hour Johnny and jump into like an
Yeah.
L1 in any big city in America or Australia or really anywhere in the world. There was like 5 or 6 cities that had seminars, period.
Yeah.
And so went out there and did my L1, and then met them face to face. It was my first date with Vanessa, and then my first real meeting with Tucker. And then went back out there in March for my weightlifting course, and then to spend a little bit longer time. I went out there one more time just to visit like a actual pleasure trip, and then met Vanessa's parents and stayed in a little Airbnb in Flower Mound. Just kind of like did relationshipy stuff together. Even though it was really only our third time seeing each other, and then fourth time really seeing each other was in July 2009 when I moved from Sarasota, Fort Worth to be with her and to start coaching at GSX. So the universe kind of propagated two things in my way. So we had never actually really actually dated. We never we
started
just
doing life,
like just all in.
Yep.
But her and I have always been good at like big bold life moves together.
Yep.
And so 2009 is when I started like my real coaching journey. Kind of more notable pieces in that 2011 is when I started with the gymnastics course. I'm still a part of that, now to this day in 2022. That's been huge. We'll talk probably at length about that a bajillion times. I ended up being the head coach and then director of operations for GSX after really only being there about a year. That was an interesting thing to navigate with a whole lot of people that had a lot more seniority, both in coaching and kind of time and place. So that was an awkward, difficult growth opportunity because I was still in my early 20s and like trying to figure a lot of stuff out. For sure, not operating from a huge place of confidence, but navigated it well, managed it well. Like looking back, it was a very, very cool. It was a cool opportunity to be given. I'm grateful to still have maintained a lot of good relationships for with everybody to this day. Had like an existential crisis a little bit after I had left. Well, it was towards like the end of my time with GSX, and I was coaching on the seminars, and I was running the gym, coaching like 25 classes a week or so. And we were running a competition series for Life is Prescribed back when they had the Life is Prescribed tour, and so that was like a global series of competitions. And
I remember those.
I just got super wicked burned out and just like came to hate the thing I love. And like, good life lesson in that, like the dose is the poison, like with everything. So like you got to figure out balance and like begin with the end in mind. That was another big piece, and this kind of like takes us where we're going next in the story. But like really begin with the end in mind, but not the same way that people normally think about goals. You just like have a goal and work backwards, but think with some sense of permanence from like a habit or a lifestyle standpoint. Like figure out the thing that you're going to be willing to do and be a part of and put energy into for like the rest of your life. And if you for sure can't foresee that even remotely, then cool. Like that doesn't mean it doesn't have to be a shorter term thing, but then you also don't have to feel bad about like when you do get to those logical endpoints, you have the ability to reflect on that and be like, well, did you really think you're going to do that forever? And that was like a good thing for us with the gym when we reached like kind of the final piece of that. But that's later on in the story. So the gym hadn't come yet because I was like, well, I'm CrossFitting my face off, like literally and figuratively. It's like my entire life and world, and still not happy with my lot in life, so to speak. Still not happy with like what I have accomplished, and really at that point, a lot of material success, and then also a lot of my own personal issues and things that I was still really working through, that like I wasn't confident in that role because I didn't feel like it was adulty enough, because I knew that like my parents didn't really get it or think that it was
Mm.
like a real thing,
Real job.
because it didn't make sense to any of my friends that I grew up with, because
Mm.
like insert amazing long list of reasons that in these seasons of life where we're navigating like who we are and what matters and what we stand for, like it's easy to make those stories bigger than they necessarily need to be. But a lot of it was also like monetarily, I wasn't where I wanted to be. So I'd always had an interest in finance. And so I finished getting a degree in business finance, got my Series 7, my 66, my life, accident, health insurance licenses. We moved down to Houston, and I was going to move into that world, and just like absolute fucking failure to launch. Just like fell flat on my face, like probably one of the larger failures that I have gone through. What I realize now is not understanding networking as a skill, not
Mm.
understanding like prospecting and acquisition and sales as skills. Just
Mm-hmm.
didn't know what I didn't know and wasn't the right person in the right place. And so there is also a piece of me that, like, I guess I fight with this because I do very deeply, genuinely believe a lot about like fitness. I value very highly, and I think a lot of people probably heard me talk about how I view fitness and how important I think it is.
Mm.
You're dealing with the ability to manipulate the variables of both quantity and quality of life, like the most priceless, irreplaceable shit in the world. Like, what is it worth to feel better when you're spending more time with the people that you love the most?
Yep, for sure.
And so, like, I do love fitness. I love fitness. I love coaching. There's a part of me that's very deeply called to that, especially because I've built a wonderful life around it. And
Mm.
I think there's a lot of people that they don't understand that, like, beginning that journey is a foot in the door for a whole life in a world that like you potentially can't imagine.
Yep. And once you open the lid on that and truly immerse yourself in it, you can't uncoach, you can't not be a coach. In some aspect or level, you're going to be, coaching something because that's just who you are. It's in your DNA. Once you tap into that and realize that, you just can't unsee that. You can't
Yeah.
stop that.
And yeah, so like that's the easy thing to sell myself on for like the altruistic side of this.
Mm.
I very much so do deeply love coaching, but it does makes it like an easy cop out to just say that that was the thing that I missed the most, and that was the thing that I felt the most deeply aligned to. I was like, I mean, that was a huge part of it, but mostly I just totally fucking sucked. I had like no skill set, and I didn't really know where to begin. And that's
Well, let's
okay to
see.
say out loud, but like that was a hard thing for me to come to terms with for a long time.
But on reflection too, you can, you and I have often said like universe doing universe shit, and had that kicked off for you, then it's a completely different path and trajectory rather than the universe going, dude, no, you're not. This is not for you. I'm going to keep pushing you back to where you need to be, and that it happens so often in life, and we don't see it till we reflect. But that's probably one of those big moments where it's like you had to fail in that spectacularly to get you back to where you were meant to be. Because even at
Yeah,
half a success, you're like, yeah, I'm going to keep doing this because I'm interested in it. Fitness
well,
sucks.
yes, it was. It's there's so much cool like looking back now, but it didn't set me up. I mean, it did set me up for a lot of success and taught me a lot of lessons, but it's a lot of things that I'm still working on, like making benefit of the things that I am aware of, that like I
Hmm.
learned the lesson, but like the application is still fucking hard because like we're just
Yep.
humans. And so,
Yep.
in the context of that, it's like I felt as though I had come off this like spectacular string of failures. And at least, how I framed it in my eyes, like my childhood very much I look at as a failure because I
Mm.
factors beyond my control. But I was like, I didn't have the things that I wanted. I didn't feel fulfilled in it. And I felt like I was to blame for a lot of that for a long time.
Mhm.
So like, cool, failed that. Didn't go straight to college like a lot of my peer group did, went to the military instead. So like, well, I
Mm.
failed the traditional path and I failed traditional university, and then I went to the military with the goal of like this specific career field, to go to the specific place, to do the specific life. Failed that, like not only failed to like achieve that goal, objective, and plan like even remotely,
Mm.
also like failed the military entirely. Got kicked out of that, got divorced, set out like, hey, I'm going to make CrossFit my entire life. Like, I'm going to build a whole
Yeah.
life around
I'm
CrossFit.
all
Like,
in.
it's going to be awesome. And then I was like, well, goal achieved, but fuck me, I hate it because, like, I still hated myself in a lot of ways. So, like, failed that because, like, walked away from all that and went into finance and, like, failed spectacularly in that. And so, like, that's a thing I'm still dealing with. And like
Mm.
that's an okay thing, I guess, to like say out loud and talk about. But like I know both objectively and subjectively, like those things aren't all failures,
Mm.
especially if they're framed as growth opportunities, and especially when a lot of them are like, dude, like it's okay for goals to change, it's okay to pivot, it's okay to reach a goal. And like that was
Mm.
maybe a little bit of the earlier conversation on understanding like impermanence. Like, yeah, you can reach a
Mm.
goal, like that's enough. Like the goal doesn't
Mm.
have to be like everything you thought it was. Sometimes it very much so, often it very much so, almost universally it very much so is just like, oh,
Mm.
huh. It's that
Yeah.
like at least having the goal gave me a purpose or a cause, which is like something for me to move towards. And like that's the thing that we really need. So like goals are this weird fucking human construct because like we're the only species that deliberately can think in these longer, more purposeful timelines to build like these objective, rational plans. But like we're still so dumb and emotional and subjective about like all of it.
Yeah.
But
And it's yeah, and it's not, and it is like, again, we keep saying that life's found in the cliches. It's like it isn't the destination, it's the journey to get there where you get the most, growth and learn the most about yourself, not, so, when you get there, you're like, oh, this doesn't feel like what I thought it would feel like. Okay, what's the next thing now?
yeah. So I think we talked through like a handful of like good lessons and
Mm.
reflections in that season of life. A big one was like find a mentor or a guide. I had a lot of that through Tucker, more so than I realized at the time, because he was, you know, it was a complicated relationship, and still, is in a lot of ways. Like there was a big piece of my relationship with him, like it did resolve a lot of like my father hanging out baggage shit. Like
Mm.
I got to go fish with him. I got to drink whiskey with him. I got to smoke cigars with him. I got to do business
Yeah.
with him. I got to do deals with him. Like we got to travel together. We went hunting together. Like we did a lot of really cool shit. And so that was good for me to have some mentorship and guidance that wasn't necessarily specific to like. I think a lot of people think in the context of get a mentor, get a guide, get a coach, that it has to be industry specific or it has to be like
Mm.
career path specific. Like it's okay just to find somebody that is like,
Mm.
a few steps ahead or has some things that, you are interested in or has a perspective that is worthwhile or just, I don't know, find somebody, do find somebody that has the ability to like at least challenge your thinking. And like, man, Tucker and I, we for sure did not, have not, and do not like see eye to eye on everything, but that was a good chance to get to work on doing something with an uncomfortable conversation. Like we did a ton of
Mm.
business stuff together, like an enormous amount. It would be, often like we would come at solving a problem in two very, very different ways. And he did a good job of allowing you the space to logic and reason to a conclusion. And so
Mm.
understanding that is a skill, and that's enormous in
Mm.
coaching, that's enormous in relationships, business and partnerships. Like recognize what the emotion is that somebody's trying to resolve, and then you have the capacity with logic and reason to show them like, hey, like the thing you're afraid of in this thing playing out is
Mm.
like losing money, right? Well, here's why like that fear is invalid or negated or resolved with this solution.
Mm.
And so like that was, being able to work on coaching in a different way, but like, peer group coaching through problem solving more complex situations. That was just a cool thing to be a part of, outside of just having somebody that had accumulated some life lessons,
Mm.
and somebody that was, Tucker was always really willing to talk openly to me about like a lot of his struggles, and that was important for me to have like a person that created like space and permission in life to talk about
Mm.
like, hey, here's the shit that like I'm struggling with. Just even talk about it out loud with somebody else, because this is not like an I think, like this is a I for sure fucking know. Like you could tattoo it on my forehead. Maybe then I'd get like a fucking record deal or something. I don't know. But I won't get any forehead. But people carry around like all
Mm.
this baggage and bullshit. They feel so isolated and alone. And you're like, nah, man, these are human conditioned
Yeah.
things. Like the vast majority of anybody that you know that's doing anything even fucking remotely cool
Mm.
struggles with a huge amount of imposter syndrome.
Yeah.
Struggles with like huge feelings of not being like good enough or far enough
Mm.
along or being good enough at the skill or producing at a high enough quality or like being
Or
X,
doing
Y,
enough.
Z. It's
Just
like it doesn't go away. Like you
no.
learn about it, you can explore it, you can manage it. And like sometimes it still kicks you in the dick. And so that
Mm.
was a really cool thing for me to be exposed to, is like seeing somebody that had made it so far in the journey and in the game. And like,
Mm.
somebody that was in a lot of ways incredibly successful, but to have those conversations that humanize. Because
Yep.
I had done a lot of coaching at that point, but you don't, well, at the time my coaching skill set wasn't far enough along that I could get into really, really kind of like meaningful pieces in the 2 days of the seminar.
Yep.
And I had been, this piece of the story like removed from coaching in the gym at GSX for a while. And a lot of those relationships were never crazy solidified because I was like the newer guy that came in and disrupted a whole lot of like culture and community and the vibe of the tribe and displaced like people and personalities. And so it was, I for sure wasn't the guy in the place at the time with the skill set to like go hard and deep in a lot of those relationships. But I had a fair degree of success by virtue of who I am and how I just approach people in life, with a lot of the basic clients that we had there, but not to the level that I got to understand it later on in the journey.
Mm.
And just kind of going through my timeline with Tucker overall was a big piece of humanizing a lot of the things that I earlier on in life would have thought that people resolve, or they're like, it's like big
Mm.
boy stuff and little kid stuff. It's
Yep.
where you probably spent most of your life thinking that most adults are way more adulty than they
Yeah.
actually are. And you're like, you
Yeah.
motherfuckers can't find your pants.
No, yes. You think you look up to them and you're like, "Oh, you've got once I get to become a grown up, I've got it all figured out." It's like, "Oh, no, it just gets way more complicated
Yeah.
and way more layers."
Yeah, and so like that also that fed into contributing to my coaching confidence, being able to just own a lot more of knowing like the truth of the human experience and the depth and breadth of it.
Mm.
That everybody deals with the same emotions. They manifest in different ways and different things trigger them, but like most people feel mostly the same in most ways most of the time.
Mm.
And it's like you go through, your early adolescence, like your early 20s, like it's that feeling of like a spotlight where you're
Mm.
convinced that all eyes are on you and you're like the center
Yep.
of attention in a bad way. And then
Mm.
later on you're like, oh, everybody feels that same thing. And that's why
Yeah.
nobody actually gives a shit about anybody else, because everybody's so worried about like the imaginary spotlight on themselves.
Yep.
I proved that to myself in a very real way later on. But so anyway, we hated Houston. We absolutely hated Houston. I was not wanting to move forward in the finance shit, and Vanessa wasn't happy with the office that she was at. So like, team send it. We decided that we were going to move to Colorado or Florida and open a gym. And
Mm.
Florida won out because at that point I had missed a lot of like the people places and things that I'd been away from. Again, for the second bigger chunk of my life.
Mm.
Um, and we figured that it would make more sense to open a business where we had better networking resources, right? Like lesson learned from finance, that like going
Yep.
into an industry in a place where you don't know anybody is like hard as shit. Like
Yes.
at least relative to the alternative, like having some people to call upon. And like you're like, well, yeah,
Yeah.
no fucking duh. But the universe teaches in such mysterious ways. They're not mysterious at all. They're like, just be
No.
less dumb, or you're gonna have to learn this
Yeah.
the hard way. And you're like, I'm gonna learn it the hard way, right? And they're like, yep.
Yeah. And I'm going to
So
learn it again and again the hard way.
we moved to Florida and didn't immediately go into opening a gym. I started coaching down there. Coached at a gym that helped me really solidify a lot of what we didn't want. I had a pretty good idea of what I did want, because at that point I had still been coaching on seminar staff for multiple years, and so like you've been around to like a lot of the world's best and brightest, and like you've seen some good stuff and had a chance to actually run GSX operationally and be the head coach, so kind of knew most things that went into it, but did coach at a gym that solidified a lot of what I didn't want for like standards, what I didn't want for culture, community, client experience. And that's not to say that they did anything wrong or bad. At the time I framed it like that because I just wasn't grown enough and mature enough to understand that like, just like for them it's okay that the standards aren't really high. Like they're not bothered by people not squatting to death or locking out overhead, because like that's not the point. That's not what they're looking for. They're looking for like a fitness party where they just want to like celebrate being in a culture and community together, doing tribal shit. Like,
yeah,
it's a very primal experience. They also like party a lot outside of the gym. Like that's a piece of their lifestyle. Like that's okay. Like that's what all of them want. Nobody is really trying to do the thing really well. Nobody is trying to get really good at it. These people generally don't care if they can overhead squat well or heavy. They don't generally care if they can, get to a muscle up.
they've moved.
Yeah, but it also helped me learn a little bit of like my own confidence and understanding like pricing. So I was like, you guys get $100 an hour for PT? You don't know fuck about shit.
Yeah. Hang on a minute.
At one point, one guy said metabolic conditioning, and I almost had a fucking aneurysm. And so anyway, but it did a lot to be like, oh, you know what? Like, yeah, you've coached on seminar staff for multiple years. Like you've run a gym that was objectively good. Like even back in 2000 and in 2009 when I started running GSX, I think at that point, before we had done a price increase, like at that point it was $125 a month for a membership, and like there's people present day priced lower than that, and that fucking hurts my brain. So I'm like, that was 14 years ago. So like, had been in a good coaching environment. A lot of those coaches had knowledge and experience, and so being in a really bad gym, well, a lot of people look at that as a negative experience. Like, man, if you're a coach out there and you're in a shitty gym, take notes. Take notes on everything that's shitty, everything that you don't like, every piece of the client experience that you feel is lacking, like every complaint that you get from somebody that you value their feedback, like take note. And that's what we ended up kind of like opening a gym around. And we opened our gym in a very deliberate, very purposeful way, because we did seek to be good team players, and we did think about the greater mission, and we weren't super worried about like the guy next to us. And so we set up as far away from any box in town as we could geographically like locate ourselves, and it ended up in a pretty good place relative to population density. The only problem was it was commercial space, not industrial space, and so it was like wildly expensive, and was for the whole time of the gym. That is a thing that I would advise to consider based on your funding and like how you're going into opening a gym. If somebody's like not far enough into it yet to have opened a gym, or if they're at the point of like moving or looking at different leases, understand what goes into commercial versus industrial space. And if you're going to be in commercial space, understand some limitations like parking, running workouts, stuff like that, but also be able to make use of it. And so it was really hard for us initially getting the gym started because our overhead was so much higher than what we had really like anticipated or thought for. And I think that kind of goes for everybody. And unless you have like a built up clientele going into opening a gym, it's
Mm.
an absolutely exhilarating feeling to open the doors for the first time
Yep.
for your grand opening and for like when all your friends and family are there and they do the fucking ribbon cutting and the Chamber of Commerce is there and you get all like the cool shit. That first time you open the doors is cool. The second time you open the doors, which would be the first time for customers, and it's like literally nobody, and you're just like, it's an empty building that I just paid a shitload of money for, and now it's
Yeah.
49 and a half days until I have to write that same fucking check again. So like it taught us to make better use of commercial space. It taught us to make better use of like networking and relationships.
Mm.
Being close to some like cool stuff that came out of that is we had a physical therapist and a Rosti practitioner that was office right next to us. We built an incredible relationship with him. Matt Sullivan, who's like
Mhm.
one of my great friends and mentors in the coaching journey that I've gone through, and just like an amazing person. And then there was a beer garden across the street that we built an amazing relationship with. And then there was a little like mom and pop diner that we built a good relationship with and got like our own breakfast item on the menu. And like commercial space is expensive, but there's very cool opportunities there in the experience of the journey. So like I wouldn't
Mm.
straight dissuade somebody from it, but like be aware that going into it, it's hard early on.
Yeah.
Um,
You've got to really work at it.
but we're getting kind of long in
Yep.
the episode, and I think that there's so many lessons that I learned in owning the gym that I've never really gotten to explore in a lot of
Mm.
podcast stuff, because it's generally been like, I mean, a lot of people want to talk about gymnastic shit, a lot of people
Yeah.
want to talk general gym owner things, but they haven't been a lot of chances to explore like what were the pieces of personal growth, what are the pieces of professional growth.
Mm.
Of that professional growth, what was like business as a skill set, what was coaching as a skill set. In my personal growth, like what were my lessons learned in fitness as an athlete, like what did I figure out about myself as a husband and
Mm.
an employer and a leader and a friend. And like there's a lot of conversation from that season of life, so I think that might be a good bookend here.
Yep. And then we can dig into that for sure. There's so much stuff in that is, even in my relatively short tenure, like although 7.5 years isn't short, but you just come out a completely different person and you realize all these things that you learnt that you never even understood about human nature and your responses to things in that space. Oh, have I still got you? There you go. You still there? It's that unstable internet.
Yeah, that was, well, this is definitely way more stable than the
Yep.
other, like notably.
That's good.
Well, apologies for being late, and I will see you next time on these conversations with myself.
Yeah, I like. All right, sir. I will see you then.
Thank you.